Oh, well, good afternoon. It's a case of here we go again because I've got a situation here where I know I've been on about these Sydney-Brisbane train times and that sort of thing in the past, so this is going to be a little bit more detailed in a sense of what probably should be done. I had a talk with Bob Schroeder in Sydney, who's in that Echo Transit, and he says that they're very interested in long distance train services. Rather unfortunately, the other group which I belonged to many years ago, which is Action for Public Transport, is not interested in long distance train services, and they say so. Quite upfront about it. And then of course what I'd like to do is address this to various groups that will no doubt see it, including Rail Back on Track in Queensland, and he'd say straight away, well, you're talking mostly about New South Wales trains, what's that got to do with Queensland? Well, the answer is simple enough, that the trains come to Brisbane from Sydney, and for that matter, if anyone from the PTUA, the Public Transport Users Association, that is to say, from Victoria sees this, could take it up as well, because it involves them, because the trains from Sydney go down to Melbourne. What Bob and I talked about, and I fully agreed with, is that any new replacement train for the XPT should be virtually guaranteed to be a tilt train, so that you could take 2 or 3 hours off the journey. It could be, instead of a 14-hour journey, it could be an 11-hour journey, for example, Sydney to Brisbane, in which case you could certainly leave, even if you said it was an even 12 hours, but it'll say 11 hours. If it left Sydney at 9 o'clock, you'd be in Brisbane at 8 o'clock at night. And if you leave again an hour later, that'd be 9, to get into Sydney at about 8 in the morning, which would be a sensible time. And of course there'd be another train going from Sydney to Casino and back, in other words an overnight train from Sydney to the Casino and back by day. So you'd have the situation as I described before, a daylight train going up from Sydney and coming back overnight. Now both of those trains would have sleeping cars, and I guess at the very least what we're talking about in several years' time would be if one of the trains is a tilt train, which is the Brisbane train, and if the other one is a rebuilt, refurbished and done up XPT, that'd be fine for a number of years to come. Well, that could go to Casino. Well, a tilt train could go down to Melbourne once a day and come back. Could go down overnight and come back as a daylight. And a rebuilt XP2 could go in the afternoon, could go down to Albury and come back as it did many years ago, as sort of a Riverina Express type of situation. It'd be more suited for a somewhat shorter journey. But either way, they've got to have sleeping cars, and as I say, a tilt train would have to have not only a sleeping car, but a proper dining or a snack bar lounge, a real lounge, unlike what we have now, which are cardboard takeaway containers, and a series of meals which aren't too bad, I suppose. There's nothing absolutely wrong with the meals that they have. But we really want a lounge car, and this is where Queensland has at least got Brisbane to Cairns has got a lounge car, of course, which is the Spirit of Queensland, and of course the Spirit of the Outback, Brisbane to Longreach, has a lounge car as well as a full dining car. No one's expecting miracles and have a full dining car on these XPT replacement trains. It's just not on. But I was discussing the configuration of the sleeping car, and Bob doesn't think it's that important to raise that right now, but I will discuss it briefly. And I'll discuss the situation regarding the sitting cars too. And also the introduction of a true and a very, very distinct first class sitter. Now, those people who have travelled overseas a bit, as I've done and many people have, will know on Amtrak in the United States they have what they call a roomette, which is a bit misleading to some people because it's a room where one person can be booked in or two people can be booked in, and over there you pay a room charge, and that's a single time. So whether you put one or whether you put two in that room is not relevant. Now in the New South Wales context, you could have 28 passengers in a sleeping car instead of the current 18, because you could have 9 cabins down each side of a passageway, and up to 2 people per cabin. Now, or they could certainly copy the Queensland style cabins that are rather innovative. At first you might be critical of them. That's the spirit of the Outback, which has converted roomettes into twinettes, and a number of roomettes, perhaps 4 per car, and the rest are twinettes. Well, they're skinny twinettes, but they have two beds and 2 wardrobes and so on. But if you use the American viewliner system, you'd have a row of windows up top for the person who's on the top bunk as well, by the way, and every cabin would have a toilet, which is really an essential thing in my opinion. So 28 passengers in a sleeper, that'd be quite a viable thing to do. It would be excellent for the various groups that I've been talking about, and the railways themselves, and the unions, and all employees and passengers and so on alike to consider. Have a look at the Amtrak roomette cabin, which are used in superliner cars, the big double-deckers, and are used in single-deck cars, which are somewhat bigger than the Australian cars. But we'd adopt the idea. And if we couldn't have a straight aisle, we'd have to have a zigzag aisle, like we invented the zigzag aisle for roomettes, by the way. So something like that could be done certainly in a XPT replacement car. So I'd put that to everybody, and I'd put the idea of a snack bar lounge must be used for Sydney, Melbourne and Sydney, Brisbane. Now a true first class would be 2-in-1 seating, and would have entertainment on the rear on the back of each of the seats in front of it, in other words. The reason for 2-in-1 is to give people an opportunity to travel in 2 at a time, couples, and a person to travel independently, and so I'll have that single seat. More importantly than anything, and I don't think even Bob Schroeder's thought about this or would even mention this, in Japan they have the Shinkansen, which everyone knows around the world. It's a high-speed train. But the most important thing there is every row of seats has a window. The windows are sort of what I describe as a 3/4 size window. They're not really a little window like the Amtrak. Some of the old cars that they Amfleet they called them. They replaced the conventional cars with these little windows. They're like an aircraft window. I'm not talking about that. The Shinkansen windows are quite reasonably large, but they're not a big double window like we get in Australia. But the disadvantage of a double window in Australia is that a lot of people end up with half a window, and it's not good enough. You've got to sit back and you're kind of looking out the window, and all you can see more or less is the pillar between the 2 windows. It's not good enough. So you need to have every row having windows. That's something that needs to be considered. So you would have a situation here where a number of economy class cars, then there'd be 1 first class car at least, or perhaps 2 if you're looking at the XPT at the present time, and then 1 sleeping car. Now those sleeping cars could be used for day use like they do now, where 2 people could be booked in that little cabin. That gives them the privacy and security that they're looking for. And they don't have to put up with noise, crying babies, or riffraff and people carrying on, you see. Now, a friend of mine mentioned that he likes to travel in that type of car, and my friend John Macaroni says that he likes to travel in the Car A, which is the XPT sleeper, which is used in daytime for 3 passengers per cabin. And once again, as I say, you're in your own cabin, you go down, you buy your food, you bring it back to the cabin, and you shut the door, and you have got privacy, security, and peace and quiet. Very importantly, you can relax in that cabin. So what you'd have with the type of train I've been discussing would be a series of 2-person cabins, actually. And they could be used for daytime, and they could be used, of course, at night time. So I've given a general view here, a general overview of what I've been discussing. A tilt train with the sleeper and the diner lounge, and a first class car. Now, whether you have, I think you have to do better than what we've got today with only 5 sitters, so you can have 7 or 8 sitters, because they'd be much higher powered train to get it over the grades and over the hills and so forth, as we all know. So that's an area that I'd like everyone concerned to think about. And the other thing is what to do with the current XPTs. I would say largely they could be rebuilt and used on the shorter length trips. They might go to Dubbo. They might go to Sydney to Tamworth and back in a day. They'd do the Canberra runs. And as I said, there'd be a run from Sydney to Albury, an afternoon train. And there'd be a run from Sydney to Casino, which would be overnight one way and by day the other. Now, that XPT would have another 10 or 15 years or more of use in it, and be very popular and useful and modern if they would rebuild those cars. Now, I've said this before and some people will be horrified, but talking about buying these trains in Korea is just foolish, bordering on ludicrous, because anyone who watches the world events, as I do, and takes a keen interest in it, would realise that the Korean War could restart at any time, and there's talk about it even being literally as early as next month. There could be a whole thing could just re-begin, and there'd be no such thing as a train from Korea. The same goes for any import, I should say, trains from India or anywhere else, because especially a world war, would be the end of all that trade. So I'm not trying to be that pessimistic or downcast on this. I'm just explaining that it's a risk. So just getting on to, once again, that situation. We've been through all of that. Now I have briefly touched in the past on connections and other things that they should be doing better. And another thing I've thought of, if there's a day return from Sydney to Tamworth with an XPT, current XPT, whether it's a rebuilt one later, there's no reason why there can't be an afternoon train up to Moree with the Explorer cars. And so you'd have a day train going up and back each day, 7 days. You'd have an afternoon train to Moree. And on other related matters, I would extend the Scone rail car service to Tamworth. Would be useful. So you'd have an evening Tamworth train, you'd have a morning Tamworth train, and you'd extend the current Dungog service to Taree, so you could have a morning train to Brisbane, an afternoon train to Taree, and a night train to Casino. So you could see there all of the markets are being served quite well all throughout the state. So I just thought I'd put all those ideas out there as it is, and anyone's welcome to use them, of course, and discuss them, and I welcome any comment. This will be going onto YouTube, and it will go onto Facebook as well, and I would just hope that people will comment and not to be rude, not to be nasty, but just obviously to make serious, genuine comments on the issues that I've raised. And once again, I do hope that people will take some notice of what we've been talking about, because right now the New South Wales TRAINLINK are not taking any notice of anything basically that people are telling them or suggesting, including myself. So I do feel a little bit frustrated over that, but I'm not over concerned about talking about, even though they're talking about having no sleeping cars on the replacement train, which I'm not happy about at all. At least you could say it's several years away, so that I, and I guess other people who like to travel by sleeping car, Sydney to Melbourne and Sydney to Brisbane, will be able to continue to do so, in the hope also that we'd have a far better timetable, as I mentioned on another video. So alright, so I've covered quite an area there that I haven't discussed for a while on YouTube or Facebook, so I do hope you found it interesting, and I'd like to hear from anyone. So thank you for viewing.